I hope now the sound is on. Yes, my mic is on. Praise Yahweh. Shabbat Shalom to you all. And we did share who is saying Shabbat Shalom to us. We have Jackie Pretorius, Jackie Ferguson, Kira and Mandy, Nicole from the Netherlands, Gillian and John and Tracy from the US. Good to see you up and early with us. We got Joshua and Guguletu saying on WhatsApp, and Patrick also letting me know that he's online. He's doing well. So praise Yahweh, and Carol also. If I've missed anybody, sorry for that, but I don't think I have. Good to have our family online with us. And for those that don't send a shalom and are watching, we send our greetings from our house to yours too. And so let's enjoy being in our Master's presence today as we can continue to serve him in great joy and gladness of heart, and continue to learn how to serve him and pursue set apartness as we look this week at Shemoth 21 through to 24, and we learn some pretty basic lessons on how to live and how to get on with one another as we guard the Master's command. So let's get straight into Shemoth chapter 21 from verse 1.
These are the right rulings which you are to set before them. When you buy a Hebrew servant, he serves 6 years, and in the 7th year he goes out free for naught. If he comes in by himself, he goes out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children are her master's, and he goes out by himself. And if the servant truly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, let me not go out free, then his master shall bring him before Elohim, and shall bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. And when a man sells his daughter to be a female servant, she does not go out as the male servants do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who has assigned her to himself, then he shall let her be ransomed. He shall have no authority to sell her to a foreign people because of him deceiving her. And if he has assigned her to his son, he is to do to her as is the right of daughters. If he takes another servant, her food, her covering, and her marriage rights are not to be diminished. And if he does not do these 3 for her, then she shall go out for naught without silver. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall certainly be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait, but Elohim delivered him into his hand, then I shall appoint for you a place where he is to flee. But when a man acts presumptuously against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you are to take him even from my slaughter place to die. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall certainly be put to death. And he who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall certainly be put to death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall certainly be put to death. And when men strive together, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be innocent. He only pays for lost time and sees to it that he is completely healed. And when a man strikes his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall certainly be punished. But if he remains alive a day or 2, he is not punished, for he is his property. And when men strive, and they shall smite a pregnant woman, and her children come out, yet there is no injury, he shall certainly be punished accordingly as the woman's husband lays upon him, and he shall give through the judges. But if there is injury, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, lash for lash. And when a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he is to let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he is to let him go free for the sake of his tooth. And when an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall certainly be stoned, and its flesh is not eaten, and the owner of the ox is innocent. However, if the ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, and he has not kept it confined so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox is stoned, and its owner also is put to death. If a sin covering is laid upon him, then he shall give the ransom of his life, whatever is laid on him. Whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter, according to this right ruling, it is done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he is to give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox is stoned. And when a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit is to repay. He is to give silver to their owner, and the dead beast is his. And when the ox of a man smites the ox of his neighbor and it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the silver from it, and also divide the dead ox. Or if it was known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall certainly repay ox for ox, while the dead beast is his.
Okay, so this week's Torah portion is called Mishpatim, and it's the plural of the root word mishpat, which literally means to right ruling or judgment or ordinances or regulations. And so it comes from the verb shafat, which literally means to judge or to govern or to rule or to pronounce judgment or give law. So there's only one who gives us the law by which we are to live and by which we are governed. And these judgments and right rulings and regulations given by him, we must do as a set-apart people of our Master. In Yeshayahu 33, verse 22, it says, Yahweh is our judge, Yahweh is our lawgiver, Yahweh is our sovereign, he saves us. And after having heard Yahweh speak the 10 words to the entire nation of Israel, they came to Moshe and they asked Moshe to hear from Yahweh any other words that he wanted to let them hear and speak. So when we look at this, we see how the right rulings are not something that's not to be done. They are further instructions that Yahweh gave through Moshe, and through Moshe, these instructions were delivered to Israel as covenant conditions on how to walk before him as now a betrothed bride. And so these are the right rulings, the further instructions, if you will. They expand on the words that they had heard Yahweh speak, and it expresses the rules for proper righteous living as a nation in unity before the Master's face. So in many ways, these mishpatim could be called or referred to as the legal procedures or the firm rulings that are non-negotiable in a manner of speaking. This is how a community would be ruled. This is how any issues that would arise would get dealt with in a prescribed and just and fair way. And so in many ways, the Mishpatim are what we could call the social laws, because it clearly teaches us how to get on with each other and how we are to behave and how we are to live according to how we have been created to be in our Master, Yeshua Messiah. Now, we are told a couple of times in Scripture, Tehillah 89 is one of them. In verse 14, it says, righteousness and right ruling are the foundation of your throne. Loving commitment and truth go before your face. Tehillah 97 verse 2 says, clouds and darkness all around him, righteousness and right ruling are the foundation of his throne. It's so clear here that when we see that the Mishpatim are part of what makes the basis of his throne of authority and rulership clearly established and firm in place, we realize then that in order to be lovingly committed and not let loving commitment and truth be forsaken, we can only do that when we adhere to the clear right rulings and the righteousness that we are to live by. And we know the definition of righteousness is to God to do everything he's commanded us to do. So with it being the foundation of his throne, the Hebrew word for foundation is machon, and it literally means a fixed or established place or a dwelling place, a habitation, a foundation, coming from the verb kun, which literally means to be steadfast, to be established, to be firm, to be determined and prepared, or be set up. And so we realize that being built up on the rock of our deliverance, we are built up as living stones according to his firm right rulings and righteousness of his word, for which we are then equipped to not let loving commitment and truth be forsaken. Mishle 16 or Proverbs 16 verse 12, we see that we are told that a throne is established in righteousness. And we are therefore able to acknowledge and recognize that the throne of our Master and Elohim has been established in righteousness. And therefore, this is what we are clearly called to walk in and follow as we walk in and follow our Master and Elohim, and recognize that when we walk in righteousness, which is to walk according to his clear right rulings, this is what we can see as given through his word. And to shut our ears from hearing these right rulings would not equip one to be able to stand before the master as a trustworthy servant. These mishpatim and righteousness are the foundation of his throne. This is how our master rightly rules his people. And it's so important that we understand the rules that he shows us how to live by as a community, as a body being built up in set apartness, because these rules guide us on how to form a community, a body that is actively serving the master, and how to rule that body as we practically live together as set apart children of the Most High. Our master in Elohim, Yeshua Messiah, he is our righteous king. And as we stay in him, we subject ourselves to his kingdom rules in order to make sure that we are being built up upon him, the rock of our deliverance. So it's very clear and plain to see that we serve a righteous master. He is high priest and king forever in the order of Melchizedek, as we understand that he is the righteous king, and the righteous king rules by his clear righteousness and right rulings, his mishpatim. And so in verse 2, the very first right ruling that we are given is in regards to slavery. Israel had been set free from slavery. So this verse speaks of when you buy a Hebrew servant. Now, this is not slavery to a foreigner, but it's speaking of being a servant within the nation of Israel. Now, one would become a servant of another if they needed to get out of debt. And then they basically sold themselves to serve out that debt, and therefore would become the property of the one to whom they had been sold until the debt was paid. A Hebrew servant was not seen as a slave in the mindset of what they were in Mitzrayim. And what they were in Mitzrayim were under harsh labor and harsh conditions, etc. That's not the conditions of a servant, a Hebrew servant, that's being spoken of here in these right rulings. And so, right ruling that's given here for a servant to serve 6 years, and then in the 7th, he was allowed to go free. What we must take note as a covenant people, with Abraham being in essence the father of the covenant, and we understand that we learn a great deal on the belief that he had and how it was reckoned to him for righteousness, how Pinchas stood up, put to death a whoring in the camp, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. We understand clear examples of being established in righteousness as regard the commands, and are servants of our master forever. Now, being a slave or a servant in Abraham's house was a better condition than most free men of his day. Think about the parable of the prodigal son that our master gives us, who, after he had squandered his inheritance, realized that it was better for the slaves or the servants in his father's house than for him being a servant or a slave in a pigsty of a foreigner. And so while saying this, we realize that being a Hebrew servant was not something that was taken lightly, because a servant was now subjecting himself to agree to do whatever that person that's bought him to do, whatever's required of him for the next 6 years. We learn some valuable lessons on what we are in the master as bondservants of the Most High. Shaul writes in his first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 7, verse 23, when he says, "You were bought with a price, do not become slaves of men." Now, our master paid the price for us. And now, because of that, we are his bondservants forever, and therefore we must not become the slaves of men by selling ourselves into their hands due to debt or enslavement to sin. Now, we take note that a slave or a servant would sell himself to pay off his debt. This is a picture where we realize that our master paid that immeasurable debt, one we could never pay. We could never work off. He has paid in full, in order that we can be set free from the world and slavery to man and the lusts of the flesh, and we can be trustworthy servants to serve him as servants who have belief. A Hebrew servant refers to one who's basically, it's not one who's captured in war. This is one that now within a community has debt, and he says, I'll pay off my debt, now I'll serve you to pay off this debt for the next 6 years, or how long the debt would need to be paid off. And then in verse 3 and 4, we see a clear restrictions or conditions on this taking a Hebrew servant that sold himself to pay off his debt. If a servant got married with a wife given to him by his master while he was a servant, he could not leave with her. Now, this would have been quite a harsh lesson for slaves who were not their own. Yet, if he says in verse 5 to 6, we see this wonderful conditional clause given here that teaches us valuable lessons on our commitment to our master. He says, if I love my master, if a servant truly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, let me not go free. Then he would serve him forever. This is such a profound statement being made here, one that we make as true servants of Messiah, our master. And when we too have made the good confession before many witnesses and declared our complete love, our devoted love for our Elohim and Savior, this is a clear recognition and reminder that we are now called to serve him forever. There was something that was to happen. And when we see how this applies for us today, let's see when he first says here in these words, if a servant truly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children. And we notice the kind of order of this statement. You know, love for the master must always come first. In Luke 14, verse 26, our master says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters and his own life too, he's unable to be my taught one. In Matityahu 10, verse 37, he says, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. This is not a command to go and hate your mother, your father, your wife, your sons, your daughters, and your own life. Love for our master must come first because it establishes the firm foundation of how we love each other. This doesn't diminish our love for our spouse, our children, those in our home. It reflects the true nature of our love. Without such fervent love for our master, we are actually unable to truly love with a complete love our fellow family members, and we are unable to show that complete love in service to our family if we are not loving him first. To love our master must always be our primary focus, because that's when we'll see the ability to love one another will just flow, and have the genuine love for one another will flow from our lives. In a declaration of our love for our master, it says here, if a servant truly says. This is so important for us to understand, as there are many today who claim that they love Elohim, yet their love is not expressed in obedience to his instructions and his right rulings, and is not actually being declared with a proper voice of belief in living out obedient life before the master. This love that's being spoken of here speaks about a complete commitment to serving our master wholeheartedly forever. And those who claim to stay in the house, so to speak, and don't love him by obeying him could then be classed as thieves and not as servants. And so this is a call for voluntary service. I mean, the servant could go free, but if he says, I love my master, don't let me go, this is a choice we all have. We've been bought at a price, and it's for freedom that he came to set us free, yet we choose to be his bondservant. True love for our master is seen in our submission to obeying his commands. Ephesians 5 verse 2 says, walk in love as Messiah also loved us and gave himself for us, a gift and an offering to Elohim for a sweet-smelling fragrance. In Yochanan Aleph 1 John 4 verse 11, it says, beloved ones, if Elohim so loved us, we also ought to love one another. And in 1 John 4 verse 19 to 21, it says, we love him because he first loved us. If someone says, I love Elohim and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one not loving his brother whom he has seen, how is he able to love Elohim whom he has not seen? And we have this command from him, that the one loving Elohim should love his brother too. So this is not nullifying the words of the master, because he says if he doesn't hate his brother, then he can't love me and he can't be my taught one. And here it says that if he hates his brother, how can you? So what it's establishing is if our love for one another is not based on the foundation of love for Yahweh, which is to guard his commands, as we know 1 John chapter 5, verse 2 to 3 says, by this we know we love the children of Elohim, when we love Elohim and guard his commands. For this is the love for Elohim, that we guard his commands, and his commands are not heavy. So love for Elohim and love for our neighbors is what the Torah and the prophets hang on. Now, this is not being hung and put to death kind of hanging that some people have in their minds erroneously. This is what they are established by. This is what we walk by as we walk in love for Elohim and love for one another through a total obedience to what's being written. And that's what this Torah portion begins to establish, how we love one another through a proper love for Elohim in obedience to his commands. An obedient and active belief begins with the gift that we've been given generously by our Master, and having escaped now the corruption of the world caused by lust, we allow our Master to give us that which continues to cause us to grow in love for him and be ready as a prepared bride for our returning King. Mishle 8 verse 17 says, I love those who love me, and those who earnestly seek me do find me. Now, this is a parable on wisdom and understanding that we are to be seeking. And our Master makes it very clear that he loves those who love him. And a major part of loving him is properly seeking him, because to love him is to do what he has instructed us to do. So how will we know how to love him if we're not seeking out what his instructions are for us? So love means basically commitment. And it's not simply an emotional feeling of fondness, but it's an expressed commitment of the required action of obedience. Love is a verb, so to speak, and it highlights complete loyalty being shown to the one that the servant truly loves. We are to be giving our full attention to our Master with all our heart, with all our being, with all our mind, with all our might. Anything less than that will not render a true love, but rather cause one to end up forsaking him rather than loving him. So when a servant truly says, this phrase speaks about one making a clear and definite choice with the intent that others would hear it. And in this case, the servant would then be brought to the door or the doorpost and have his ear pierced through with an awl. So we see here that we get the picture here as we go through this Torah portion, how many people don't want their ears pierced, so to speak, with the truth. They rather want their ears tickled. So when we look at this process of bringing him to the door or the doorpost and piercing his ear, we can learn some valuable lessons, because we do know that the pictures that we're given here, we can see our Master clearly being spoken of here as the good shepherd, and as sheep who know his voice, we come to him. In Yochanan 10 verse 7, he says that he is the door of the sheep, and we declare our love for our Master who bought us at a price, and we come to him and declare that our desire is to be his servants forever and belong to him forever. And this is a declaration of a love that we give to our Master. And this is how we draw near to him, by that which he's given us through his blood, where once we were unable to come into the covenants of promise, but now by his blood, he's given us access to draw near. And this concept of drawing near is one that we should grow familiar with as we pursue apartness and guard the Sabbaths, keep the feasts, because this is all about recognizing the blood that causes us to draw near and be in the presence of the one who's bought us at a price. The Hebrew word that's translated as bring comes from the word nagash, which means to draw near or approach or come close. And it highlights the action of a servant's declaration of his love for his Master. The Greek word that's translated as bring in the Septuagint is prosago. It means to bring near or lead or approach. And it's used to help us understand the significance of Yom Kippur, the Day of Coverings, as we're reminded that it is through the blood of Yeshua Messiah that we are, in fact, equipped and enabled to draw near to Elohim and be cleansed as a bride that is ready for a returning husband. Prosago is used in 1 Peter 3 verse 18, where it says, because even Messiah once suffered for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to Elohim, having been put to death indeed in flesh, but made alive in the spirit. So Messiah is the door that we are caused to draw near to in our bold acknowledgement and our declaration of our love for him. The doorpost gates and doorposts are symbolic of the place that reminds us of the right rulings of Elohim. For it was at the gates of a city that the judges would sit and rightly rule the people. And it's the doorposts of our homes that we are commanded to write the commands of our master on, so that in our going out and our coming in, we don't forget to guard the commands of Elohim, and we're reminded what kind of people we ought to be. And so the Hebrew word for doorpost is mezuzah, which means a gatepost or a doorpost. This is a word that's used 19 times in Scripture, and it's used to speak of the gates or the gateposts of the city of Gaza or Azar, which Shimshon carried away together with the gate. Very strong man at that stage. Is symbolic of the picture of authority of the enemy that was being carried away and destroyed. This word mezuzah is also used to refer to the gateposts of the tabernacle court, as well as the gateposts of the temple that Shlomo built, as well as that which is described by Yechezkel in referring to the millennial temple and the gates or the posts, the pillars. And so we see in Shemoth 12 verse 7 and verse 22 to 23 how the Israelites would apply the blood of the lamb to the doorposts of their homes. And so we see a picture here of recognizing the place, the authoritative place by which we enter and exit in our master. He is the door. And in Devarim 6 verse 9 and 11 verse 20, we are commanded to write the commands on the doorposts of our house and on our gates. So simply put, we all have doorposts. If you have a door that you enter in and through your house with, that's the place that you can write the commands. You don't need to go and buy a little box called a mezuzah. A mezuzah means doorpost. You have one already. And the servant would come to the doorpost, declare his love for his master, and have his ear pierced. As I said, this piercing of the ear is a picture of the ability to hear and allow his word to be heard, even as it pierces us. Too many people today want to be servants or claim to be servants of Messiah, yet only want their ears tickled. They don't want to truly be pierced with the truth. And this piercing of an ear with an awl at the doorpost would be symbolic of a servant now belonging to the house, submitting to the authority of the house. And there are many today who are simply unwilling to submit to authority like this. Today, when people don't like what they hear, they all too quickly rush off to find another assembly or somewhere else that they can get something that they like to hear, because they like to just have their ears soothed and tickled. Yet they never show true loving commitment and submission. What the piercing of the ear symbolizes for us today is a permanent decision that would not be reversed. The Hebrew word for ear, ozen, means an ear, or it means to hear or attentive or recite or reveal, coming from the verb azan, which literally means to give ear, to pay attention, to be perceived by the ear, and it carries the idea of listening and paying attention, paying attentively, listening attentively, not paying attention. And it literally means to cup the ear. In other words, your focus is on what's being said and not just hanging about and, oh, what did you say? Our relationship to Yahweh begins with the command to hear. And so the ear is the appropriate place to bear this reminder of who we have chosen to belong to. And to commit to the house means to commit to the right rulings of the house, which are written on the doorposts, to say, I hear what you are saying, and I will guard all that I hear. In Tehillah 40, verse 6, it says, slaughtering and meal offering you did not desire. You have opened my ears. Burnt offering and sin offering you did not ask for. Our master has opened our ears. He's opened our eyes so that we can hear, so that we can see, so that we have eyes that can see and ears that can perceive and understand. And this piercing of the ear at the doorpost where the Torah was written shows us a dedication to the commands of the house of the master, who is the door. And he who has ears, that is, ears that have truly been pierced and have committed by choice to follow the master, then let him hear these right rulings and live by them. Because we are called to live by belief, and we live by that belief by properly hearing, guarding, and doing what he's commanded us to do. And we must beware against the ear ticklers that Shaul warned Timotheus would come in the last days, because many people won't bear sound teaching, but they'll heap up for themselves, according to their desires, those that are teachers that are tickling the ear. In other words, they're going to people calling themselves teachers, but those teachers aren't truly teaching the Torah. They're just soothing them with, it's okay, he accepts you the way you are, and, all that romanticized lies that are tickling many ears today, rather than having the truth of the word. Piercing is not a bad thing. It's what's needed so that we can truly have ears to hear what the Spirit is saying. And a servant who declares his love for the master would have his ears pierced at the door and therefore turn his ear to the master, while the one who does not love his master would turn his ear away from his master. And we are given a clear warning that the one who turns his ear away from the hearing of the Torah, even his prayers are an abomination. In other words, they're not accepted by the master. So a valuable lesson we're able to see here on coming to the door and allowing us to recognize the commitment that we've made to our master when we've come to the good shepherd, the door of the sheep, and made our commitment to serve and follow him forever. That commitment has said we will make sure that every Shabbat we'll hear what Moshe says. And so that we guard this right ruling and meditate on it day and night, so that we don't go out there in the field and put a foot out of joint. The servant of the master that's been bought at a price, declared love for him, acknowledges and confesses that they are bondservants of the Most High forever. And we've got a great example of this given to us in the renewed writings, because Shaul in Romans 1 declared that he was a servant of Yeshua Messiah. Yaakov, who was the half-brother of Yeshua, also declared that he was a servant of Elohim and of the Master Yeshua Messiah. Kepha declared that he was a servant and emissary of Yeshua Messiah. Yehuda said he was a servant of Yeshua Messiah. And so we got perfect example that while in the Greek mindset, the Greek word for servant, doulos, carries in the Greek mindset something of oppression in many ways, but that's not so with a true servant of the Master in covenant. Because we recognize the responsibility that comes with the declaration of being a bondservant, but also are reminded of the joy and the freedom that comes with us being given access into the benefits of having a covenant relationship that gives us all that we need to serve him in spirit and in truth. A servant of Yeshua Messiah, as servants of our Master, we declare our commitment to hear God and do. Joel writes in his second letter to Timothy in chapter 2, verse 24, "And a servant of the Master should not quarrel, but be gentle towards all, able to teach, patient when wronged." And Israel, our Master, declared that Yaakov was his servant as a body that was to be a light to the nations. In Yeshayahu 44, verse 1, it says, "But now hear, O Yaakov, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen." This is a clear call that his chosen covenanted people are to have ears to hear, as we see in the 7 assemblies in Chazon, all giving a clear witness, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. So we've established that a servant, which is a picture for us, because none of us want to leave his house. And so while we were enslaved to sin, we've been bought at a price, we've been set free, but we are now have the choice because he died once for all. So everybody has a choice, but we choose to come to the doorpost and say, I want to stay in this house forever. And therefore we have now the privilege to stay in this house as long as we obey the rules and keep the garments clean. So then we come to a section on a female slave in verse 7 to 11, or a female servant. And here we see the protection of the female that's given as a servant or appointed as a servant. And she must not have her rights neglected at all. Devarim, or Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 17, tells us that a female servant can have her ear pierced too, just as the male servant. Now, in verse 7, it tells us when a man sells his daughter as a servant, he does not go free as male servants do. Now, I just want to highlight, many of you may have noticed, you might not have if you weren't listening while the reading was going on, but where in the translation of the ISR scriptures and most translations, when it says engaged, Carlin said assigned, okay? I just want to highlight that the Hebrew word that is translated in the ISR scriptures as engaged is possibly, well, we believe it's not the right translation into English. It comes from the root word in Hebrew, ya'at, which literally means to appoint, agree to meet, being assigned to or designated to, being summoned or appointed to. And it's a clear reference of her being designated as a servant who is a daughter of the house that she's serving in. That's really what this is about here. And so in verse 9, we are told that if she was, I mean, Carlina said assigned. I can say other word is appointed. If she's appointed or assigned to her master's son, this wasn't an engagement. And I know in italics it says wife, and even other translations, italics, it says wife. So the misconception in translation is a slight error here because the context here is about servanthood to pay off a debt.
You do not sell your daughter to
You don't,
someone's wife.
no, you don't sell your daughter to be someone's wife to cover a debt, because that's not the context here. So I hope this brings a bit of clarity. So if she was appointed or assigned as a servant to his master's son, she would be treated as a daughter. Now, any servant that comes to serve to pay off a debt is treated as one of the household. Not like the Mitzrayim mindset of slavery. You are treated as if you're one of the household. And then when you commit to staying in this house, you become then grafted in as one of the household, so to speak, which carries great lessons for us on how we were once far from the covenants of promise, but now we've been brought near, grafted in by the blood of Yahushua Messiah, and we become fellow members of the household of Elohim. And so if she would be treated as a daughter. Now, if the son took another, not wife, because we must dispel this, and I have refined the notes that I have previously sent out. I've refined them a bit just to get better clarity, to stop any confusion, because I do believe it's important that we get this. So if he took another servant, then the first female servant that was appointed or assigned must still be cared for, because it might be he gets assigned this female servant, but he doesn't like her, so he goes and takes another one. He can't neglect the one that was already assigned to her. Her rights cannot be diminished. He would be required to supply her food, her clothing, her shelter, or else she could go free and the debt is no longer applicable. So it's all about a transaction and right and fair justice being administered for the debt that's been accrued in a circumstance. That's what this is dealing with here. Now, we also realize that we have been appointed, assigned, so if you will, to the Son, and our rights are preserved in our Master when he tells us that we should not worry about what we eat, what we wear, or where we shall sleep. He tells us that in Matthew 6, verse 31. Now, again, in verse 10 and 11, it says, if he, that's the son, takes another, not wife, be careful because it's not right there. It takes another servant, then the rights of the first servant to whom she was appointed must not be diminished. And if he does not give her food, her clothing, and her shelter, she is to leave for free without any silver, because the debt of her father or whatever would now be settled. And she goes back to her father. I hope that's as simple as this gets. And because of the incorrect translation in italics of wife, it's caused a bit of confusion in trying to translate a simple and very clear mishpat. What we see here is a shadow picture of the sure promise of our appointment to the master. For he himself, as I said, tells us not to worry about food, clothing, and shelter. He's bought us at a price. He's redeemed us. He's given us the full assurance of his complete provision forever. His word does not fail. Therefore, we need never fear having to leave his presence without silver, without redemption. And so what we're able to see being presented here in verses 7 to 11 is that a female servant that is spoken of here is really what it's about. And so the engaged translation into engaged and having wife in italics kind of puts, as I mentioned, the word for engaged doesn't mean betrothal. It means assignment or appointment. So if the son designates or appoints another female slave, the living rights of the one that he wasn't pleased with cannot be diminished. I know I've repeated myself, but for good reason, because we need to get clarity. Now, here again, I think marriage rights is also not the right translation, because the word for marriage rights in verse 10, when it says here, what does it say? In verse 10, it does say marriage rights. Eh?
No, but I mean, she's
Yes.
allowed to get married.
Yes. But what I'm saying in the context of he wasn't betrothed or engaged to her, etc. Now, the Hebrew word for marriage rights comes from the word ona, which means cohabitation rights or marital rights. So it can be living rights, or it can be if she was appointed as a servant, it doesn't mean that now she's not allowed to get married to somebody else. Now, it comes from an unused root, and it's only used here in Scripture, this word. And it highlights a word that means to dwell together, highlighting that she has the rights of one being part of the household that she's been assigned to or designated to. And the fact that she's been assigned to that does not mean she's not allowed to actually get married to another, because this assignment is for the purpose of paying off a debt. Carol is saying, is it not possible that the translators were influenced by the fact that some servants became concubines, as in the example of Leah and Rachel's servants? Just a thought. No.
They weren't sold to be paying off debt.
This is the context of paying off debts. That's what we must take note. So Leah and Rachel and her servants were not taken as concubines to pay any debt off. So good question, but the answer is no. And I just think that translators have made possible errors through many centuries of translator errors based on certain traditions of trying to diminish rights of people they think they have control over and abuse that, and not in the proper sense of assignment, and separating the idea of assignment and marital betrothal, because this is not what this is dealing with, but it does protect the one that's been assigned to pay off a debt from her being still able to get married to another. So that's what this is saying. And so the point of this passage is that the female servant being appointed to the son to pay off a debt is basically now seen as one of the house, and he has to treat her as one of the house and cannot neglect her. Okay, I hope that settles it, because it's actually very simple, but somehow it's become complicated, and I hope that brings clarity. And because of, look, not all italics is wrong, but sometimes the italics kind of don't get it right, okay? And I thank our master that we can refine our understanding in this. So then we come to verse 12 to 14. If you murder, you're going to be put to death. I mean, how simpler do you want to get? The Hebrew word that's translated as strikes is nacha, which means to make physical contact with a blow, or to strike or cause the destruction of an object, or strike with the mouth of the sword, or kill. Premeditated murder was punishable by death. If you killed by accident, then a place of refuge would be the place to flee to, where right ruling, Mishpatim, the Mishpatim or right rulings would determine and decide whether you were guilty or not. And protect you from the revenger of blood. And cities of refuge, which we know were allocated when they entered the promised land, and where an accused murderer could flee to and be kept safe for trial, so to speak. In the promised land, 48 cities were to be given to the Levites, and 6 of those were to be cities of refuge for the manslayer to flee to. Now, you could go to a city of refuge. The Hebrew word for refuge is miklat. It means refuge or asylum. And this noun actually denotes the place from a place of refuge from the revenger of blood. And it's used 20 times in Scripture, miklat. It's always used in connection with the cities that were appointed to provide asylum for those that were guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The one who was guilty of murder was put to death, while initially those not guilty of homicide could seek asylum even at the slaughter place, while those who were killed with a premeditation would be dragged from the slaughter place and executed. Verse 15, respect your father and mother and do not strike them. Just want to touch on this because we learn valuable parables from Shlomo's Proverbs in this too. We also see in Shaul, writing to Timotheus in 1 Timothy 1, verse 8 to 9, he says, "We know that the Torah is good if one uses it legitimately. Knowing this, that the Torah is not laid down for a righteous being, but for the lawless and unruly, for the wicked and for sinners, for the wrongdoers and profane, for those who kill their fathers or mothers, for murderers." Now, laying down the law, or laying down the Torah being laid down, it's laid down to rest and never to be resurrected again. It's dead. No, it means it's the gavel of the judge has been laid down and it's determined the sentence. Because if one uses the Torah legitimately, the way it should be, and following the right rulings, then it's not laid down for a righteous being, because a righteous being won't be standing before a judge to have an official rule being declared for a situation. So the Torah, what Shaul is saying here, that we need to use the Torah legitimately, and not, it is used against those who are wrongdoers, profane, wicked, sinners, those who strike their father or mother. Now, striking one's father or mother is a serious offense that's classed amongst those who are the most wicked. And it's classed with the really wicked offenses. The Torah will come down on you greatly. That's really what's being emphasized here. Now, in Hebrew, the word for mother is em. And it means mother or point of origin. It's used 202 times. It's always used to express mother, except for once, when it's used in Yechezkel 21, verse 21, where it says, "For the sovereign of Babel shall stand at the parting of the way and at the fork of the two ways to practice divination. He shall strike the arrows. He shall ask the household idols. He shall look at the liver." And here the word that's primarily used for mother is translated here as the parting. And it means the source of departure. And it's in a clear metaphoric sense, we're able to see that the sovereign of Babel, standing at the parting of the ways in order to practice divination and witchcraft, is a clear picture of departing from the source of nourishment and training of a mother in order to resort to abominable matters that will cause a mother grief. Chava is figuratively referred to as the mother of all living in Bereshit 3, verse 20. Devorah is referred to as the mother of Yisrael in Shoftim 5, verse 7, in a time when leadership had ceased, and she arose as a mother. And the term mother is also used figuratively in describing a city as a mother to its inhabitants, and the clear rebuke that's given to her for causing her inhabitants to run riot, to turn away from the right rulings of Elohim, is very clearly expressed in Yeshayahu chapter 50, verse 1, Yechezkel chapter 16, verse 44, and Hosea 2, verse 2. A clear rebuke for the city that was supposed to nurture, train, and look after its inhabitants had turned away from right ruling. And as one studies the context of this term em, for mother, we are able to get some great insight in terms of the role and duties that are expressed metaphorically, figuratively, and practically as a mother, portrayed both literally and figuratively or metaphorically in the word. Firstly, we're told that a mother is a comforter. I mean, I say firstly, but it's not in specific order. Yeshayahu 66, verse 13 says, "As one whom his mother comforts, so I comfort you. And in Jerusalem, you are comforted." A mother is a teacher. Mishle 31 verse 1 says, "The words of sovereign Lemuel, a message which his mother taught him." A mother is described as being one who disciplines. In Zechariah 13 verse 3, it says, "It shall be, when one prophesies again, then his father and mother who brought him forth shall say to him, 'You shall not live, because you have spoken falsehood in the name of Yahweh.' And his father and mother who brought him forth shall pierce him through when he prophesies." We also take note of what her children owe her as a mother, and that is to respect and honor her, show obedience to her teaching and instructions, and never dishonor nor forsake her Torah, as we see in Mishle 1 verse 8, where it says, "My son, heed the discipline of your father, and do not forsake the Torah of your mother." And the picture of both father and mother represents both for us discipline and teaching that is needed to mature a true child to become a trustworthy and faithful son of Elohim. And having said that, we see how the discipline of a father and the Torah of a mother is abundantly clear as a picture in Scripture given to us to teaching people up correctly in the word of Elohim. And the purpose of the Torah, train them, teach and train us in the word of Elohim. The purpose of the Torah is to train us to maturity. As we are told clearly in Galatians that the Torah is a trainer to Messiah. And so as we grow up under the discipline of a father and the Torah of a mother, both metaphors for the fullness and the teachings of the Torah of Elohim, we're brought to a place of maturity, enabled and equipped in the Master to walk according to that which we are trained by. We do not forsake the Torah, for we know that the Master in Elohim, Yeshua Messiah, is the living embodiment, the Word made flesh. And so we uphold the Torah, we guard it as trustworthy sons and daughters of the household of Elohim. And to neglect the need to walk in the clear wisdom of the Torah and submit to the clear instructions, the teachings, the discipline, and the comfort that the Word brings to us is simply foolish. And it will not cause a father to rejoice or a mother to rejoice, but it would bring grief to the one who brought him forth. So the one who strikes his father or his mother is a picture of one who refuses to walk in and obey the Torah of Elohim. Verse 16 highlights the lesson on not kidnapping anybody. This literally means to steal a person. Do not kidnap. What this shows is a lack of respect and love for one's neighbor, and therefore breaks the commands of Elohim. Selling the one who was kidnapped would not be done within Israel, but to foreign nations. We see a picture of this with Yosef, who was kidnapped by his brothers and sold to a foreign nation as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. And for this, they were worthy of death. Yet once again, we see through the life of Yosef a clear shadow picture foreshadowing the work of our Master in Elohim, who was in effect also kidnapped by his own, sold for 30 pieces of silver, yet we who deserve death find his compassion, his mercy, his loving commitment to forgive us. They sold Yosef for 20 pieces of silver, and this would later become the evaluation of a male between 5 and 20 years old when a man separates a vow by one's evaluation of lives unto the Master Yahweh. So Yosef was still a youth. He was around 17 years of old, and this shows 17 years of age, of old. It shows a separation of Yosef unto Yahweh, as we see that the price of evaluation for a life between 20 to 60 was 50 shekels. And for a female, it was 30 shekels. And then we learned some valuable lessons on our Master paying the price for us, where he was sold for 30 pieces of silver. This is the price of him bringing us back from being kidnapped by the enemy through sin and lawlessness. This is something that we truly need to recognize. The Hebrew, why I'm saying that Yosef was kidnapped is because the Hebrew word for kidnapped is ganav. It means to steal, kidnapped, or be stolen. And it's a word that's used to describe what happened to Yosef in Bereshit 40, verse 15, where it says, "For truly I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done naught that they should put me into the dungeon." These were the words of Yosef, that he was making clear what had happened to him. And so, do not curse father or mother. This is the opposite to respect father or mother, which we looked at last week as part of the 10 words, the first command with the promise that you live long in the land that Yahweh gives you. And what this takes note of is that we don't take lightly of the instructions and discipline of a father and mother in the context of being taught Torah and the Mishpatim and the right rulings and ordinances and decrees and commands of our Master. The Hebrew word for curses is kalal, which literally means to be light, to be trifling, to be cursed or despised. And it explains for us the exact opposite of respect, which comes from the Hebrew word kaved, which means honor, heavy or made heavy, or giving the idea of taking proper weight to, considering carefully the discipline and training of a father and mother. The opposite of that is to make light of it. That is to curse a father or a mother. Mishle 1 verse 8, I mentioned earlier, "My son, heed the discipline of your father and do not forsake the Torah of your mother." And in Mishle 20 verse 20, it says, "Whoever curses his father or his mother, his lamp is put out in deep darkness. This is a clear warning. We've been called out of darkness into his marvelous light so that we now allow the discipline and teaching of the Torah to keep us in the light, to shine as the light, not hide that light. And when we curse the Torah, curse our father and mother, that which disciplines and nurtures us, we risk having our lamp put out. And so therefore we must not despise the proper training and discipline of the word, because if we are trained by it, it will bear the peaceable fruit of righteousness. You know, Shlomo was clearly setting forth for us that which was given in the Torah, as we see, looking at this Torah portion that we are dealing with today. Now, our master came and he spoke these words to the religious Pharisees in Marcos chapter 7 from verse 10. He said, "For Moshe said, respect your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But I say to you, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is korban, that is a gift, you no longer let him do any matter at all for his father or his mother, nullifying the word of Elohim through your traditions, which you have handed down, and many such you do, or many such traditions you do." So nullifying the word of Elohim through tradition is what has been handed down. And this is what people have been doing by making light of the Torah and in fact cursing the Torah. And they've allowed the tradition to say, yes, it says this, but our tradition says this. And this is exactly what the Pharisees had done. And this is what Christianity at large has done, and any other that are attempting to be a bride of Messiah, yet not subjecting themselves to the commands. Rabbinic Judaism did the same. Our master rebuked the religious Pharisees for adding to the word oral commands, traditions that would be highly regarded over the right rulings of Elohim. In Shemoth 20, verse 12, we're given the command to respect our father and our mother. We spoke about that last week. And Shaul carries this idea through in his letter to the Ephesians when he says in chapter 6 from verse 1, "Children, obey your parents in the master, for this is right. Respect your father and mother, which is the first command with promise, in order that it might be well with you and you live long on the earth." So he was making a clear picture again, setting forth a clear lesson on obedience to the Torah. And one can only understand Shaul's letters when we truly submit to the good shepherd, come to the door, have our ear pierced, and recognize our need to meditate on and hold fast and guard the commands, the Torah, the Mishpatim of our master. And then from verse 18 to 24, it deals with fights and injuries. Because you know what? We live a life that, the flesh gets in the way at times, and sometimes we find ourselves in a place we wouldn't like to be, and here's how you deal with it. If a fight breaks out between two men and one loses his ability to work, the other must pay for his lost time and injury. In a sense, today we see many industries having what they call workman's compensation. When you're injured on duty, you kind of get compensated for time lost. And, so that's the kind of idea. It's a scriptural concept, certainly, but we're talking about community living in the body of Messiah. If the injured man is not affected in doing of the work, then no payment is due. I mean, if two people are just fighting and nothing happens, let them carry on, make up. And the idea is we shouldn't fight, because though we walk in the flesh, our battle is not according to the flesh. And we must be reminded of this. We are to fight the good fight of the belief. And the purpose of these verses in this chapter is to give us clear guidance that there are proper right rulings and there is fairness in all circumstances, and that not one party must get done in or gain more than they should. Elohim is just. He is fair. His right rulings guard us against corruption. It guards us against violence and unnecessary injury to the community and body of our master. If one causes injury to a pregnant woman, that is, if he causes her to miscarry, then the sentence is as murder, which is death. If there is no injury, and for causing a premature birth due to fighting, then the one who caused this would still be punished as the husband would lay upon him. The text goes on to say that if there is injury, then it shall be required that the payment and restitution for the loss is brought about. If it is life, then life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc. This isn't a revenge command. This is a settlement in a fair manner, a just way, not taking advantage of another. And it's done through the judges. Eye and tooth speak great lessons. In a sense, the eye and teeth speak of one's freedom. Because when we understand that we need to fix our eyes on our master, we need to meditate on the word, we learn valuable lessons on a parable sense. But a servant's eye is worth a servant, and the same goes for his teeth or a tooth. You know, it's important for the sustenance of life, because without teeth, you know, false teeth and dentists weren't necessarily the things that people ran to back in the day, you know. So if your servant lost his teeth, he wasn't really able to chew much, you know, and eat well. And this principle of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, it's not calling for mutilation of another's limb, as injuries were settled through the payment or by the payment through monetary damages. And this right ruling actually just sets the correct limit to that which can be imposed. One cannot try to get more out of the damages that were caused for that which is rightly due. And the one who has suffered damage must not be neglected to getting what is rightfully due. So this is fair justice that's actually being administered here. It teaches us a clear standard of proper right ruling and the just punishment of or sentence that ought to be rendered for each individual case. Now, our master in Matityahu 5, I think we read that last week or the week before, not so long ago, we read those 3 chapters from 5 to 7 when he was speaking to the crowds. And remember, he spoke in parables. But in chapter 5, verse 38 to 42, he says, "You heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the wicked. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other cheek to him also. And he who wishes to sue you and take away your inner garment, let him have your outer garment as well. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and from him who wishes to borrow from you, do not turn away." Now, Yahushua was not nullifying this right ruling that we're reading about in Shemoth 21. He was rather bringing about a deeper need for loving commitment toward one another, and he raises the mere letter of the word to the spirit behind the letter. The reason for these right rulings, and that is that no advantage should be taken over another, and that no one should be wronged, you know. Timotheus bet 2 Timothy 2 verse 24, it says, "A servant of the master should not quarrel, but be gentle toward all, able to teach, patient when wronged." And Shaul kind of rebuked the assembly in Corinth in chapter 1 when he says, "Brother against brother goes to be judged, and that before unbelievers. Already then there's failure with you, that you have lawsuits among you. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? But you yourselves do wrong and cheat, and that to your brothers." In other words, he was highlighting that you're trying to take advantage of a situation here, and you're trying to go beyond what the right ruling of Elohim is. So rather just get wronged and get back to the proper standard of righteousness. The heart behind these verses is very simple. Always seek the good of your brother, and if you happen to be wronged, don't make it your life's ambition to get even. Let it go. Realize that our master's already settled our debts, and leave it to him to find the proper settlement on our behalf, if need be. Now, verse 28 says, "A stoned ox is not to be eaten." When an ox had killed someone, the ox was to be stoned, it was to be put to death, and it was not permitted to be eaten. Why? Well, it wasn't killed according to the manner for food, and for the purpose of food, and for giving thanksgiving to Yahweh. And so it's not that there was a disease on the ox, it's just that it wasn't brought as a slaughtering to Yahweh to give thanks to him, to be accepted as food. This was an ox that had done what it shouldn't have done, and possibly because its owner had not actually kept it the way it should be kept. In verses 29 to 30, if the owner has knowledge that his ox had a habit of goring and he did nothing about it, and it happened again, well, first of all, if it gored the first time, it should have been stoned. But somehow it gives a clear right ruling here that if he knew that his ox is in the habit of trying to gore and he lets it happen, he would face the punishment of death along with his ox. What this highlights here is a lesson of how we have responsibility for that which we have control over and for what we know. And if we have knowledge and recognize a problem that can occur and we don't take precautions to prevent it and knowingly expose others to the dangers that they might not be aware of, we'll be held liable for their injury or death, and it cannot be blamed on someone else. Think about it for a moment. This teaches us valuable lessons as well, in terms of if we don't warn a brother and he trespasses and is killed, we're responsible. We get great lessons when we look at the words that were given to Yechezkiel. If we have warned them and they still go and trespass, then they are guilty, we're not. Now, a ransom could still be given if a sin covering was imposed upon him. If, in other words, he could make payment. And Yahushua reminds us that he's paid our price. So therefore, we do not need to be put to death. But it comes now with the responsibility of making sure that what we've been entrusted with in our lives, we take proper exercise and care over. And then in verse 32, we get the picture of the 30 pieces of silver. Right through scripture and in prophecy from Zechariah is shadow pictures of our master being sold for 30 pieces of silver. And for a free man, the rate that can vary according to the judgment of the court in verse 30, or for a slave, a price was fixed for a slave, but for a free man, they could decide the price so that no one may undervalue his worth. You want to see that in verse 30? I mean, not in verse 30. Where am I here now? Yes.
If it was a free man, wouldn't he be killed?
A free man. Yes. Sorry. If for a free man, the rate can vary according to the judgment of the court. Okay. So it says here, where are we? When a man strikes the eye of his, okay. When the ox gores a man, however, if the ox, okay. If a sin covering is laid upon him, then she'll give the ransom of his life, whatever is laid upon him. So whatever is laid upon him, whatever is decided by the courts, he could pay the ransom price for that. Whether it is gored a son or gored a daughter, according to the right ruling, it is done to him. Okay. So what we take note of here, then we come to a passage in Scripture that many have misused and abused in terms of justification for their breaking of Sabbath and breaking of the commands. And that is verse 33 to 34 in terms of this picture of an ox or a donkey in the pit. Our master used this analogy as something that was lawful to be done on the Sabbath when he healed a man on the Sabbath. In Matthew 12, verse 11, he said to them, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if he falls into the pit on the Sabbath, shall not take hold of it and lift it out?" Now, this is a life and death situation. It's not, oh, well, my car ran out of petrol on the way, so I stopped and got some petrol at the garage on the Shabbat. Oh, my ox was in the pit. No, that's not what this is dealing with. You didn't prepare properly for Shabbat. I mean, I'm using a simple example because we've heard this before. Helping a brother out of the pit, that which he's been trapped by deceit and is injured on a Sabbath, is doing good. So a life and death situation is what this is dealing with here. Woe to the man who makes a pit or causes a stumbling block for others to fall in. Now, it was common in ancient Israel to dig pits of various sizes for various reasons, such as storing grain or fruit, as well as trapping animals. And beware is the warning that's given to the one who digs a trap or digs a pit in order to trap others. Tehillah 7 verse 14 to 16 says, "See, he who is bound with wickedness and has conceived trouble and brought forth falsehood, he has made a pit and dug it out, and falls into the ditch he made. His trouble turns back on his own head, and his wrongdoing comes down on the top of his head." In Mishle 26 verse 27, it says, "Whoever digs a pit falls into it, and whoever rolls a stone, it turns back on him." So one of the things that we see here is this idea of an ox or a donkey in the pit. Firstly, a pit needs to be dug. And that's why I'm looking at this idea and lessons that we get even in the parables of Shlomo against the dangers of digging pits. The Hebrew word for dig is kara. It means to dig, cut, pierce, excavate, or dive through, or dig through. And this object the object of this verb is usually a trench or a pit or a cistern, and it's used figuratively to trap people in an evil plot. The word is used to describe the man of Belial who plots evil. The Hebrew word that's translated as pit is shachat, which means corruption, destruction, pitch, ditch, or grave. And in Tehillah 103, David reminds us to not forget the dealings of Yahweh, because in verse 4, he says he redeems our life from shachath, from destruction, from the pit, from the grave, from corruption. He not only redeems us from corruption, but he leads us in paths of abundant life, and we have joy to the satisfaction of our being in his presence, which teaches us that nothing else can satisfy us like the presence of our Master and Elohim. And the one who's guilty of not covering a pit will be liable for payment, and the dead animal is his, which he would not be able to eat, as it had died in the field and would not be rendered able or clean for consumption. Now, this is a wonderful, again, it wasn't slaughtered with thanksgiving for the purpose of providing food. And what we're learning here is that if you dig a pit, which is a picture of entrapment and pursuing self-gain, you'll find that it'll turn back on your own head. It will cost you. This chapter 21 emphasizes the need for us to learn the clear lessons on taking personal responsibility for our actions. And sadly, that's something that we see being avoided today in a big way. As so many people might have or try and hire the services of others to get off the responsibility that they are required to face. With Yahweh, there is right ruling, and we have been called out to him, and we have been called to be set apart in him and declared our desire to be his servants for life. And now we have the responsibility to uphold these right rulings. We need to carefully consider the outcome of life, our life, and how we might affect others with every decision that we make. Therefore, we must carefully consider our actions and our speech as we seek to see the return of Israel as a whole. So whatever actions I take, I need to be aware of it and how it's going to affect others. Be it my spouse, my children, be it others within the body, fellow believers in the community, as well as outsiders. Let's continue looking at more regulations, right rulings for community living. Let's go to chapter 22. Okay.
When a man steals an ox or a sheep and shall slaughter it or sell it, he repays 5 cattle for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there is no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there is guilt for his bloodshed. He shall certainly repay. If he has not the means, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is indeed found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or donkey or sheep, he repays double. When a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed and lets loose his livestock, and it feeds in another man's field, he repays from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. When fire breaks out and spreads to thorn bushes, so that stacked grain or standing grain or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall certainly repay. When a man gives silver or goods to his neighbor to guard, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he repays double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought before Elohim to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. For every matter of transgression, for ox, for donkey, for sheep, for garment, or for whatever is lost which another claims to be his, let the matter of them both come before Elohim. And whomever Elohim declares wrong repays double to his neighbor. When a man gives to his neighbor a donkey, or ox, or sheep, or any beast to watch over, and it dies, or is injured, or is driven away while no one is looking, let an oath of Yahweh be between them both, that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods. And the owner of it shall accept that, and he does not repay. And if it is indeed stolen from him, he repays to its owner. If it is torn to pieces, then let him bring it for evidence. He does not repay what was torn. And when a man borrows from his neighbor, and it is injured or dies while the owner of it is not present, he shall certainly repay. But if its owner was with it, he does not repay. If it was hired, he is entitled to the hire. And when a man entices a maiden who is not engaged and lies with her, he shall certainly pay the bride price
for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he pays according to the bride price of maidens. Do not allow a practicer of witchcraft to live. Anyone lying with a beast shall certainly be put to death. He who slaughters to an Elohim except to Yahweh only is put under the ban. Do not tread down a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Mitzrayim. Do not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you do afflict them at all, if they cry out to me at all, I shall certainly hear their cry, and my wrath shall burn, and I shall kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. If you do lend silver to any of my people, the poor among you, you are not to be like one that lends on interest to him. Do not lay interest on him. If you take your neighbor's garment as a pledge at all, you are to return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, it is his garment for his skin. What does he sleep in? And it shall be that when he cries to me, I shall hear, for I show favor. Do not revile an Elohim, nor curse a ruler of your people. Do not delay giving your harvest and your vintage. Give me the firstborn of your sons. Likewise you are to do with your oxen, with your sheep. It is to be with its mother 7 days. On the eighth day you give it to me. And you are set apart men to me, and you do not eat any meat which is torn to pieces in the field. You throw it to the dogs.
Okay, before looking at this chapter, I got a WhatsApp from Hanali in Namibia just saying, Shalom, shalom. I want to know if I should help someone financially if they are not Torah observant, especially on Shabbat. Someone asked me for money for food, but I know they're not living righteously. They know the truth. I've spoken to them about it for many years. I do not want to judge. That's not my place, but I am irritated that they don't respect the fact that I want to keep the Sabbath. I don't want to do any financial transactions on Sabbath. But the word also states that if it's within our power to help those in need, please help me to understand Abba's perfect will in situations like these. I know it's lawful to do good on the Shabbat, but if they don't honor Yah, am I not enabling them to keep living in sin? Okay, so I think it's the obvious answer is we spoke about what is lawful to do good on the Shabbat. It's life and death situations. And those that aren't guarding the Sabbath now coming and wanting you to give them supply and do transactions of the Sabbath, I would say no to that. Now, it's always good to be kind to strangers, because if they're not guarding the Sabbath, they're strangers and foreigners to the covenants of promise. So they're not those of the household of Elohim. So when we look at that, I do think that it is important that you establish a firm stand on saying, I'm not going to do any transactions on the Shabbat. Like you've said, you have been speaking the truth to them. They have the ability to join you if they can on a Shabbat and experience the freedom that the Shabbat brings to us, the nourishment and the provision that Yahweh brings through obedience. But I do think you're answering yourself in the sense of enabling the person to continue in their lawlessness. And sometimes what might be seen as tough love is actually the correct love. And so I do think that we need to be careful against being manipulated emotionally to feed the desires and needs of those that are rejecting the need to submit and obey to the master.
Technically the word, we must help our brothers
Yes.
that are poor and needy.
Yes.
We are not supposed to help people that are not part of your neighbor is the one that
in the community.
In your
Yes.
community, not the outsiders. Yahweh is disciplining them.
Yes. I think the main thing that this is where people get confused, because we say your neighbors, and who is your neighbor? I mean, Yeshua, the taught ones asked as well, the master, who's our neighbor? And he goes beyond that. And obviously, we're not saying you cannot do good to people out there. It's a good witness to them. But in the context of being on guard against manipulated and people want to use emotional manipulation to say, well, almost they won't say it, but their actions are saying it. You're a believer. You should help me. But they don't want to submit to walking in the ways of a believer. So that's where we've got to start drawing the boundaries and saying, okay, well, you know what? You are in need. And the way that I can help you is to tell you the truth. Come on the walk, learn the truth. This is the way that you can submit. This is when the master will open doors. But just to feed somebody's lawlessness, you're right. You've answered yourself. I would put a foot down and say no, because it's a way of disciplining. And that's not you judging. It's setting the standard of right ruling. Because if you do fuel that, you are in effect, could be, let's just call it what it is. You could have actually, in a sense, if that was your heart to give, to help somebody, that could have been used more productively within the body. where there might be a need. But I'm not going to get into that, but I do think that it is important that we recognize the separation between doing good on the Shabbat is not going and giving somebody money that's not keeping the Shabbat on the Shabbat. I think you've answered yourself there. That's correct.
But just as also as far as the judging goes, that's exactly what Yahweh says. We are supposed to judge according to His Torah.
Yes.
We're not supposed to judge according to our own
Yes.
view. And we can't now say, shame, poor, the guy is hungry, but he's calling you to break the
Yes.
Sabbath.
Yeah.
That's when you're judging according to your own opinion.
Yeah.
And that's what we're not supposed to do. According to His law, we should judge.
Yes. I hope you also got that. And for everyone that's listening, we are to administer right ruling. And that's why we're learning the right rulings here, because this is what we are to administer. That's how we judge others. So we are to judge others not according to our own standard, but according to Yahweh's right ruling. And the fact that, and in this example, the fact that the person is not guarding the Sabbath, despite having heard the need to guard the Sabbath, then a proper right ruling and judgment, the fact that I'm not helping you now on the Sabbath, is a proper administration of judging the way we should, because it's not according to your own judgment, it's according to Yahweh's right ruling of separation and set apartness. So I hope that answers that. And then we can come to chapter 22, where we are able to learn further regulations and right rulings that we're looking at today. This Torah portion is about the right rulings, the Mishpatim. And in verses 1 to 4, we see the regulations that deal with the theft of animals. This expands what is given in terms of the 8th commandment, so to speak, and payment for stealing an ox or a sheep. If an ox was stolen and slaughtered or sold, the payment or loss would be 5 cattle for an ox and for 4 sheep for a sheep. This would cover any damages and loss, because if one is taken, it's not just the one, because you might think, why 5 for 1 and 4 for 1? Well, when you steal an ox or a sheep and it's slaughtered and it's no longer able to do anything, the life that could produce, that's why 4 or 5 needs to be replaced. Obviously, the ox is a bigger animal. It costs a lot more. And so therefore, it's the right ruling to make sure that the worth of that ox that was gone can be replenished correctly. That's really what's being administered here. Verse 4 tells us if the stolen animals are found alive in the thief's hand, then the payment would only be double. It wouldn't be 5 or 4, it would be double. So it'd be 2 for 1. And what's worth taking note of, as I said, the ox is worth more than the sheep. We also recognize that it would only be a king or a sovereign and the high priest, both very wealthy, that ever required to bring an ox for an offering. Even if it was on behalf of the nation, it was the high priest or the king that would bring. The rest of the people would bring the rams, the lambs, the goats, etc. And so it may be more highly valued, because while a sheep certainly provides wool, an ox can accomplish work for its owner as well. And so if the thief burglarized in the night and was killed by the owner of the house, then the defendant would not be guilty of murder, as this would be seen as self-defense. But if the burglar was killed during the daytime, the house owner was guilty of homicide. Now, when it says here the sun rising on him, doesn't necessarily mean that he was breaking in the daytime, that he's not. This is basically, it's saying that when there is found to be evidence that incriminates him, for example, a poor man is suddenly looking very wealthy. Where did he get all these sudden riches? Or if a man sees another man with his possessions, so you might see it a day or a week or whatever later, that's in the daytime. That's what's being spoken of here. The thief may only be killed if he's caught in the action on your property stealing, not later. And it might only be discovered later that it was him. Now, proper restitution must be made for the property stolen as described. Double if the property is found on him. And if he has sold what he stole, as per verse 1, then he is to pay back the value of what's been stolen and sold in order to make right what the owner has lost in potential income. Now, if one troublemaker or thief would steal from his neighbor one much needed possession, then the penalty is to pay back 2. So the whole chapter then expands the command to love your neighbor as yourself, as Yahweh certainly does not leave it in our hands to decide how we are to love one another or what love means to me. He made it clear what love is, obedience to his commands, and this is love for him when we love our neighbor and keep his commands or guard his commands. Therefore, we should not seek to steal from our neighbor. Loving one another means taking responsibility for what you stole or broke. Well, you shouldn't be stealing. Shaul says, let him who stole steal no more, but actually get busy with his hands to bring about something to give. Walking in the Torah means taking responsibility for self and others and how we build community Yahweh's way and not by our own perceptions or selfish motives. If we catch someone doing something wrong, we have a responsibility to bring it before the judges, and that is to bring it before the proper right ruling of Elohim and not brush it under the rug, so to speak, in some twisted ways of covering it in a falsely proclaimed love. Matityahu 18 verse 15, our master says, if your brother sins against you, go and reprove him between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. Lucas 17 verse 3 says, take heed to yourselves. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. Yaakov 5 verse 20, it says, brothers, if anyone among you goes astray from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner back from straying of his way saves a life from death and cover a great number of sins. In essence, what we see here is we have a responsibility that when someone actually breaks covenant with us, sins against us, we must go and reprove and rebuke them. And if they repent, you can forgive them. In essence, we see a picture of light and darkness being given here, because light in Hebrew represents knowledge and darkness, ignorance. Ignorance or walking in darkness is an expression of one who's walking in lawlessness, and the one who walks in the light or knowledge is an expression of one who's being obedient. We are to walk as children of light, walk in obedience to our master's commands. And what is clear here is that the picture of those who walk in darkness, their end is death. However, those who come into the light, in other words, come to the knowledge of their sin and repent thereof, then there is mercy, there is compassion for the one who turns from his sin, as the light of the Torah shines on his deeds of darkness and what needs to be repented of. Our master says that when he comes as a thief in the night, those who are found to be in darkness will get what is rightfully due as a punishment for sin, which is death. However, we are not children of darkness. We are of light, as Shaul reminds us. We must walk as such. We must discern the times. We must keep watch. The devil is seeking to rob, steal, and destroy. And we must know the devil's end. It's the lake of fire and the second death. And there's a twofold lesson that's given here. One on community and right ruling, and the other is on punishment for being found in darkness, so to speak. And that is caught in the act. And the opportunity for redemption to be found in the light, that is coming to repentance, where Messiah has settled our debt for stealing by walking in darkness. And so here again, it's how you deal with the situation on bringing a proper restitution, primarily of the one. That's why Shaul says in Ephesians, he who stole, let him steal no more, but let him get busy with his hands so he has somewhat to offer. And verse 5 highlights the need for us to give our best, because it gives the picture of when your field was grazed bare, and then you let your animals go out to graze another one's field. You are required to give the best of your field and vineyard to the neighbor's field where your livestock had grazed. This is very straightforward. It's extremely fair. It was a way of paying for feeding your livestock, and it's a way of restoring not only what was taken, but also maintaining a proper relationship with one's neighbor. This verse can speak of an owner not properly managing his livestock, and so he lets his field get grazed bare because his livestock are let loose. And then when his field is all eaten up, he proceeds to go to his neighbor's field and let his livestock graze there. This shows...
Just feeding and they cross the boundary.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, how can you pay for your field, from your field, if it's bare?
Yes, well, if it's grazed, but if it's bare, it can be the produce that might have been gained from it already. He can use that if it's been harvested a bit. Now the livestock go and graze in his field and take away of his harvest.
Yeah, I think it's also the importance of the boundaries.
Yes.
That you keep your boundaries.
But that's where I'm getting to. This is about stewardship. Because if you just now go and let your livestock loose to another field, you haven't established your boundaries. And actually, we have a responsibility to make sure that that which is in our control is not let loose, so to speak. And we see here, there are so many people, we learn some valuable lessons. This is a picture of carelessness, because just to assume, my cattle can just go over there. He didn't have his boundaries, because if there was proper boundaries, his cattle or his livestock would not go to another field because it would be properly restricted from doing so. So this speaks about carelessness as well. And what we see, and a lesson on how people behave today, it's a picture of people being let loose, in a sense, being symbolic of what we can see being termed today as acting like an unreasoning beast, with a do-as-you-will approach, without any care for the effect that it has on any other, as long as you're benefiting. And here the payment for such carelessness was that you were to give of the best of what you had already harvested. So many people today, in a metaphorical sense, have been let loose. And what they're doing is they're grazing all over the place, so to speak. They're simply robbing others of their goodness and kindness and taking them for a ride, so to speak, exploiting many. And grazing can be a picture of eating right and in a prescribed manner, not being let loose on every wind of teaching that will cause one to become unstable and careless. We must be submissive to the Torah and heed the very word that we are to be grazing on and meditating on day and night in order to become obedient and not be careless as a true responsible guardian of the word, and not let loose so that anything goes kind of mindset. Our master calls for our best, nothing less. To do that, we cannot be careless in our walk of life. Any compromise lacks one's ability to give their best. And when you do not give your best, you might find yourself actually taking from your neighbor, so to speak, draining him out of unnecessary time, resources, which in time to come will require you to give back your best to him. The heart of this matter is to not take carelessly take advantage of others, but rather give of your best in building up one another in the most set apart belief. Just want to touch on a comment Muachi family gave here on the chat. We judge within the body of Messiah according to his righteous standards, and outsiders are already judged by Elohim unless they repent. We can definitely be kind to strangers and assist where possible, but set the correct boundaries. Example, I will not assist you on after Shabbat. So just confirmation of what we were saying earlier. Thank you, Joshua and Guguletu. And then we come to fire. And here we see the picture of a field being set on fire. Fire teaches us valuable lessons in Scripture too, as we render the clear witness here that he who kindled the fire would repay. Now, Yaakov gives us some insight into learning a lot of the right rulings and the parable pictures that our master gives. In Yaakov, or James 3, verse 5 to 10, he says, "So too the tongue is a little member, yet boasts greatly. See how a little fire kindles a great forest. And the tongue is a fire, the world of unrighteousness. Among our members, the tongue is set, the one defiling the entire body and setting on fire the wheel of life. And it is set on fire by Gehenna. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man is able to tame the tongue. It is unruly, evil, filled with deadly poison. With it we bless our Elohim and Father, and with it we curse men. We who have been made in the likeness of Elohim, out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brothers, this should not be so. He's not giving license for you to go and strike fires with your words. He's saying it should not, because man is doing this is sinful man, this isn't the way it should be. In us being restored to the likeness of Elohim, we must control our tongue. Kindling a fire can be a metaphor in Scripture for starting an argument or a fight, or for causing strife and division within the body. It can even speak of one gossiping or starting a gossip, one that spreads and can run like wildfire, destroying everything in its path, the reputation of some. Gestures and non-verbal actions that can cause doubt regarding another's integrity can be just as damaging as it causes the entire assembly to react. Often we might find that we say things that we didn't mean to say and then realize the damage it can cause, and the one who kindled it must repay. We must also realize that there are some fields that do need to be burnt and refined by fire in order to bring about a proper cleansing and a new growth. But we better make sure that we have the authority, in a sense, to burn another's field with words of correctness and the right judgment of our master, so to speak, as we know what we are doing and held responsible for any fires that are kindled in righteousness. If you are not sure of what you're saying, keep quiet. If you're not sure about what you want to say, keep quiet. If you don't have the necessary and relevant facts to bring about the proper right ruling of the word, you would do well to keep quiet, because even a fool is regarded as wise when he keeps quiet. In verses 7 to 15, these verses give further instruction of our need to take care of other people's goods that are left in our care. Any possession that's been left in our care or that we've borrowed, treat it as your own. We are responsible for that which is in our hands, be it of our own goods or that of somebody else's that we've borrowed. Now we see today what happens. Somebody can borrow a lawnmower or a whatever, I don't know, whatever it is, a hairdryer, whatever you want. And on a practical lesson, we've seen in our life how some people can borrow things from other people and they don't treat it with respect. What I mean is it ends up getting broken, it ends up getting scraped, scratched, whatever it may be, and ends up not working. And then they give it back not in the state that it was given to them. If we can't take care of the little things, how can Yahweh cause us to be trustworthy with weightier matters of his kingdom and his body? This is again a clear call to take responsibility for one's actions. If you have caused your brother loss of any kind, pay back what is due and ensure that the relationship is held intact. So, for instance, maybe you borrow somebody a car. Lend somebody your car, or lend somebody something that is great value. But if they go and break that thing, they need to fix it and restore it to the way it was. Just small examples of what we see in the proper right rulings. Then we get verse 16 to 17 highlights when a man seduces a maiden and sleeps with her, he is to pay the bride price, take her as his wife. This is very clear. This is a responsible way of living, that there's not loose living, just the way the world portrays it today, that, you can just go and be joined with whoever you want to and leave them, and it's no responsibility. What we see in the body of the master is this picture of going and having intimacy with another is about a covenant of marriage, the mystery that should reflect the master and his created. Anything beyond that is not right, And we who were once in the darkness and maybe not operating in that way, when we've come into the light, we operate in complete set apartness. Verse 18 comes to a clear warning against not having any witchcraft. Now, what's worth taking note of in Scripture, a witch or a sorcerer here in Shemoth is in the feminine. Now, we've mentioned before that in Scripture, now we know in Messiah there is no male or female because we're his body. So we realize we must all get immersed, etc. But what we also take note of, an important lesson in terms of, because people say there's no male or female in Messiah, so that means women can be on pulpits. I'm going a bit off track, but not really. Bear with me. The officers that our master appoints to equip the body are all masculine officers. And that's why Shaul says he does not permit a woman to teach another man, in the sense of being in an assembly and overseeing an assembly. Now, certainly we can all learn and be taught by one another in a body that's growing and building one another up. But the appointment of elders or eldership or leadership within a body are all masculine roles. Here, the sorcerer being in the feminine is possibly due to the fact that in ancient societies, women were seen as holding less authority, and this would be a means for her to take up an assumed authority and influence outcomes. This witchcraft is seen as rebellion, and one of the primary examples we are given of a whore, and all the parables of Shlomo that warn against the whore, is Isabel is a picture of one who practices witchcraft and influences through trickery and manipulation the outcome of events in many people's lives. And this is what must not be tolerated in the body of Yeshua Messiah. And the Hebrew word that's used here for one that practices witchcraft comes from the verb kashaf, which means to practice sorcery, use witchcraft, be a sorcerer or sorceress, and it can also be defined as a whisperer. That is one who speaks in secrets and uses the ability to enchant people in leading them astray through mysticism and what they determine as darker, deeper truths of magic. The action of witchcraft and sorcery involves the acts of obtaining powers from wicked spirits, demonic spirits, often with the associative meanings of rebellion and seductive false religion. Sadly, Yehuda allowed practices of witchcraft to live, and today we see in rabbinical Judaism this practice of Kabbalah, magic. The root verb kasaf or kashaf is only used 6 times in the Tanakh. Pharaoh had magicians in his court who practiced witchcraft. The Torah defines for us the penalty of such actions being worthy of death, as seen in this verse that we're looking at, as well as in Devarim chapter 18. Among the many sins of the wicked king Manasseh, who reigned over the house of Israel for 55 years, at the end of his life he repented. But in 2 Chronicles 33 verse 6 it says, "And he made his sons pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and practiced magic, and used divination and witchcraft, consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of Yahweh to provoke him." Nebuchadnezzar had practices of witchcraft in his service. You can read about that in the book of Daniel chapter 2. The prophet Malachi was told by Yahweh that the practices of witchcraft would be destroyed in the end, along with all adulterers, liars, murderers, oppressors of widows, foreigners, and those who do not fear Yahweh. I'll read from Malachi 3 verse 5. It says, "And I shall draw near to you for right ruling." We're talking about right rulings today. "And I shall be a swift witness against the practices of witchcraft, against adulterers, against them that swear to falsehood, and against those who oppress the wage earner in his wages, and widows, and the fatherless, and those who turn away the sojourner, and do not fear me, said Yahweh of hosts." So when one rejects the right rulings of Yahweh and says they're not applicable anymore, but uses in many aspects the cunning ways of Isabel and corrupted ways, are the ones that will be destroyed by Yahweh, because they are not drawing near to him for right ruling. And witchcraft is also seen in the process of enticing others to worship other mighty ones, and we see how influential worship music can be, and how important it is that, having come out of slavery, well, I'll mention it again because I do think it's relevant in terms of witchcraft and that which has been done in idolatry. We cannot bring, let's just call it what it is. I'll speak as plain as I can. We've all come out of a church system. Doesn't matter what denomination you were, because there's over 30,000 denominations. So I'm not going to name all of them, but you've come out of a corrupt system of Sunday worship. You cannot bring that worship with you and try and adapt that unto worship to Yahweh. You can't change the titles and the names and think, well, now he knows who I mean. That worship must be done. And there are a lot of people on this walk that are practicing witchcraft in their worship.
It can also be applicable to verse 20.
Okay. He who slaughters to an Elohim, except to Yahweh, is put under the ban. Yes. So
to their music, they're not supposed to exist.
No. I was getting to that. When something is put under the ban, it means it's not accessible to you to use in any form. It's dead to you. It's not something that you can actually reach out and take to use. That's the idea. We take note that, as I'm mentioning, and you know what, it's these small but not small matters that are important in our presentation of set apartness. We cannot bring corrupt worship and that which was done in falsehood into the body of Messiah and now try and adapt it, change it, and present it as worship to Yahweh. Because that worship was made in falsehood and made in idolatry, and it cannot be brought as something that is clean and presentable before our master, for it's still profane worship. And I hope you get that. And I'll even go so further today, and I mentioned it a few weeks ago, and I know it's a rising trend in the world, and more so in the body of Messiah, and that is worship that's produced by AI to Yahweh. Just because the world is using AI to make songs, there are some ministries out there that are producing album after album after album within days, because they type in a few lines, they say they've organized it and they've made it, and they let AI produce this. It's stealing, number one, from resources that are already put on by many artists, and it's copying and breaking fundamental rules for set-apart living. And so therefore, I am very vocal against AI being used to present worship to Yahweh. I mean, I'm not going to get into AI on other things, but more specifically, we're talking here about witchcraft and sorcery and idolatry. And I couple that with that. You know, using technology in programs to bring about a creation of worship unto the master is not AI. What I'm talking about is that which AI steals from voices and everything else and putting things together, and you can choose your genre, you can choose whatever, and pop, here comes this thing that's very catchy, very, lively, and it sounds wow. It doesn't have the breath of Yahweh. And this is what we must be on guard against, because it's steering people away in a subtle, small way, because it's growing very rapidly. And I believe this is what a remnant bride should be on guard against. Because you know what? There are qualities that you can hear right now in AI. You can identify whether even you can hear it. But there's coming a time where we'll not be able to discern. And if we're not rightly discerning now, how are we going to rightly discern it when it really, it always matters, but when it starts to get, so these are urgent things that I do think when it's time for true worshipers to stand up and worship the master in spirit and truth, throw away all kind of witchcraft. And I believe AI produced worship is a form of witchcraft today that we must be on guard against. I did challenge a ministry in the past about it, and I was obviously rebuked for that. And you know what? We need to judge according to Yahweh's right rulings. And I do believe that we must be willing to make sure that we're not bringing corrupted things into our life as a life of worship and praise before our master. We need to let go of what we inherited by lies and corruption, and we must be on guard against the practices of witchcraft that are subtly creeping in to lives through wicked ways that aren't using a proper right ruling and set apartness of our master. We cannot allow the spirit of Isabel to bring in rebellion through her false teachings, through her false prophetic words that have an ability to lead away many with tickling ear messages into falsehood that's presented and sold as truth to the unwilling, unhearing ear. Then we see no bestiality, and I'm not going to get into that. It's very sick, but it was a form of occultic worship, infertility rites. And this is an abomination in Yahweh's eyes. And then where we come to verse 20, which ties in with what we're saying here, serve no other mighty ones. Do not, he who slaughters to an Elohim except to Yahweh is put under the ban. In other words, when you slaughter to Elohim, the Hebrew word for slaughter, it comes from the word zavach, which means to offer a sacrifice or to be sacrificed. And the derivative of this is zevach, which means thank offerings or feasting. And in Tehillah 4 verse 5, we are told where we see the noun and the verb zevach and zavach being used in offer slaughterings of righteousness and trust in Yahweh. We see a number of times in the Psalms this being declared. Let them be slaughterings of thanksgiving. Tehillah 107, Tehillah 116. I bring you a slaughtering of thanksgiving. In Hebrews 13, verse 15, it says, through him then, let us continually offer up our lives, a slaughter offering of praise. That is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. So we understand here this, anyone who slaughters to an Elohim, but to Yahweh, other than Yahweh, he's put under the ban. He's destroyed. So we realize how important it is for us to be making sure that we are not bringing corrupt worship to our master and slaughtering other mighty ones. Remember, when we read passages and we might go read and we read the term Malkam. Oh, I've said the word. Relax, that's in the word. I'm not saying go out there and scream it on the hilltops. But in terms of using corrupted titles, names of foreign deities and things that shouldn't, in respect to worship unto our master and slaughtering to him, that's idolatry and witchcraft, which will be put under the ban. So for teaching purposes, I'm saying that for this clear, and I say it often, almost every week, because I do think it's something that many are not wanting to hear. They don't want their ears pierced with this truth, and we need to be pierced with this truth very clearly so that we have ears open and vigilant. You cannot bring the worship from corrupted Christianity to worship Yahweh, and with that, you cannot associate Yahweh with Lord and God, or in the Afrikaans, Here. So we must understand that we must get our lips cleaned up, because we must strip ourselves of all that was done in falsehood and have Yahweh restore unto us a clean lip of praise that worships him and him alone. Once again, there are many Torah ministries that are blending this, mixing, or tolerating whatever anybody decides to call Yahweh as, oh, he knows who I'm talking about. No, you should know. He knows what you are saying. And he's given us his name by which he must be called on for all generations. And that is Yahweh, Elohim of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That is his remembrance forever. Now, this command to not slaughter to other mighty ones also includes the reminder that a slaughtering can also be seen as partaking along with others. And therefore, we're not even to partake of that which is slaughtered to false mighty ones in terms of occasions. This means we should not be partaking in pagan-rooted traditional feasts and think that we can then also partake in his feasts, and it's okay to do that. Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 10, that we're not able to drink of the cup of the master and the cup of demons. You're not able to partake of the table of the master and of the table of demons. You can't mix the two and think it's okay. And that must go through into every area of our lives. Being set apart means being set apart. We cannot be slaughtering thanks to other mighty ones and think we're actually meaning it to Yahweh. We are to bring slaughtering to Yahweh alone as a daily living sacrifice, recognizing that which he's purchased us with. And the Hebrew word for put under the ban is charam, which means to ban or utterly destroy. And it also means to be devoted to Elohim, which once it's been given, must then be destroyed to have no more human use for it, so to speak. And so we understand this, that as we take ground in our walk of obedience, we learn what is off limits. And therefore, that which is off limits must be utterly destroyed, lest they ensnare us to compromise our obedience. And so anyone who offers slaughtering of praise to another false mighty one will be put under the ban, will be destroyed. Do not mistreat the foreigner. So we've been dealing with how you deal with your neighbor. And then as people come out of Mitzrayim, so to speak, in our day, we must be careful not to mistreat or oppress them. Remember that we too were once enslaved in the system of religious lawlessness. We are to care for them and guide for them while not allowing them to bring in their pagan practices into our midst, because we are to nurture and facilitate their growth and must always be willing to welcome them and teach them in the ways of the master. We must be the salt and the light, and not belittle or trample upon them in ignorance, but rather encourage them to learn the master's ways. And Zechariah 10 says, do not oppress the widow and the fatherless, the stranger and the poor. Do not plot evil in your heart against one another. Because Yahweh takes serious the widows and the orphans, which you can see also being given as a clear rebuke and against a rebellious bride in Yeshayahu 1, and what they were told to actually do in terms of learn to do good, seek right ruling, reprove the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. So that the orphan and the widows are those who have nobody to actually stand in their stead to defend them. And when we have got to make sure that we're not neglecting them, it means, the idea in Yeshayahu 1 where it says defend the fatherless, the Hebrew word for defend is shafat, which means to judge, govern, rule, which we're looking at here, shofetim. Exercise right ruling for those that don't have a father to actually administer right ruling for them. The Hebrew word for fatherless, yathom, means fatherless or orphan. And the command is clear: act as a proper lawgiver and judge for those who don't have a father in the home to do so. Help the fatherless to have proper government of the Torah exercised in their lives and be one to rule and judge them as a father, as head of the home would do. And pleading for the widow, in a sense, the word for plead is riv, which means to strive, contend, argue, complain, find fault or quarrel. Now, this isn't go find fights and quarrels with a widow. In the tense that it's written in, it can be understood as meaning conducting a legal case or lawsuit. The Hebrew word for widow, almanah, means a widow or even a desolate house or a desolate place, and it comes from the word al-alman, which means forsaken or widowed, and comes from the verb, which means to put to silence or become speechless. So in other words, be the representative of one who's lost the ability to speak for themselves. What is being made clear here is the need to restore to doing what is good and right in Yahweh's eyes, and to strive and contend for those who have been forsaken and put to silence, as they have no authoritative voice that is able to speak and contend on their behalf. The orphan is generally associated with the sojourner and the widow in the object of special concern when he's grouping them together. And what we take note of, the ultimate thing here is, just because somebody doesn't have a voice to speak and they don't have the protective covering, we mustn't just neglect them. We should be able to stand up for them, nourish them, provide for them where we can. Shaul gives Timotheus a clear standard of what is correctly understood as a widow that should be cared for, because a younger widow can get married again and find the covering, find the protection, etc. And so what we must see here is that often the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow or the poor were overlooked. They were neglected, and rulings were made that excluding them from receiving a fair right ruling. Did you want to share something? And so this is what we are saying. Just because somebody doesn't have, now a widow or orphan didn't have a head of the home to go to listen to the counsel and go and plead on their behalf. And that's where a lot of them got neglected. Do you want to share something?
It's important to distinguish between the foreigner and the stranger,
Yes.
and the poor and the needy and the widow and all.
Okay.
Because it says don't oppress the foreigner.
Yeah.
But look after the widows and the orphans and the poor. There's a difference.
Yes.
And I think that's where people get
Confused.
mixed up. We're not, you don't oppress them, but it doesn't mean you have to look after
No,
them.
no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You know, to oppress them is to make them actually just really
Like their
push them
lives-
down and make their lives miserable. No. Okay. So,
Because we get, that's where Hanali's thing comes in now. It's like that is a stranger now.
yes.
It's not part of Yahweh's people. Because
No.
it says the poor of my people.
Yeah.
That you mustn't, that you can not lend your money at interest,
Yes.
so you help them. But you don't have to help a foreigner.
No.
Just don't treat
Don't
them
oppress
bad.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't make their lives worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when we look at this command, taking care of widows and orphans, we see this as, again, not setting aside their rights. That should be the rights that everyone in the community has. And so when they weren't cared for, Yahweh says they would cry out. And those who had not cared for them would suffer the consequence of their families becoming fatherless. So the Greek word that's used, this in 1 Timothy 5 verse 3, the Greek word that's used for widow is kera. And Shaul gives Timotheus very clear instructions and detailed instructions in regards to widows and the call for care for true widows as seen. I encourage you to go read 1 Timothy 5 from verse 3 to 16. And For a more in-depth look at the need to defend the fatherless and plead for the widow, we recognize how important it is as a functioning body of Yeshua Messiah to be properly aware of the expected responsibilities that the body has towards those that do not have the ability to defend or plead for themselves, as they lack the proper authoritative role in the home that is supposed to be governed by the Torah of Elohim. Okay, and then in verse 25, the command to take care of the poor and the widow and the orphans is followed by the clear instruction to not take advantage of a brother in need. When you lend him money, don't charge him interest. This doesn't show love and concern, but rather this shows selfish or self-gain, as today many are lending money as a great means of actually gaining interest. And when it's in your capacity to help your brother now, don't now try and impose even harder conditions upon him. Our master says in Luke 6, verse 30 to 35, give to everyone who asks of you, and from him who takes away what is yours, do not ask it back. As you wish men should do to you, you also do to them in the same way. And if you love those loving you, what favor have you? For sinners too love those loving them. And if you do good to those doing good to you, what favor have you? When even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive back, what favor have you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. Rather, love your enemies and do good, and lend, expecting none in return. And your reward shall be great, and you shall be sons of the Most High, because he is kind to the thankless and the wicked one. Now, this is not, he's not changing the right rulings. He's getting to the heart behind it, because one shouldn't lend when you have the ability. Firstly, you need to have the ability to lend. If you don't have the ability to lend, you don't get debt to lend, okay? So if you have the ability, what Messiah is saying is you have a right to get it back, and the responsibility of the one that has borrowed must pay back what he's borrowed, because that is right ruling. You don't take advantage of a brother that is helping you out either. But no interest should be imposed, because that just puts harder pressure on. To a foreigner, you can impose interest. That's what's saying, because then you can, so you can certainly lend to a foreigner, but then you're going to get interest back. So the agreement must be drawn up. Mishle 28 verse 8 reminds us, he who increases his possessions by interest and profit gathers it for him who shows favor to the poor. So if one's sole focus is to just see how much you can get out of your brothers by lending them and you get back, you know what? You're going to actually be gathering up, and it's going to end up going to the poor, because Yahweh will direct it the way it needs to go. Yeshua tells us, well, in verse 26 and 27, it says, if you take your neighbor's garment in a pledge at all, return it to him before the sun goes down. And then it was his only covering. It tells us in verse 27, what does he sleep in? And if he cries out to Yahweh, he'll show favor. He'll hear him. Yeshua tells us that if someone takes our outer garment, then we shouldn't withhold our inner garment as well. And for this cause, a true brother, this will cause a true brother to be ashamed of what he has done and rise to the occasion in obeying the command. In 1 Corinthians 6 verse 7, it says that we already, I mentioned it earlier, at fault when we have lawsuits among us. If we take a pledge from a brother who owes us something and he does not have the means to sleep or eat or have food, he's got no food, and we're sitting in the comfort and luxury of abundant provision, we should not withhold the only means that he has to survive and return it by night, and let him come in the day and again return it at night. This is the picture, because if that was his only covering, don't let him suffer. This would facilitate the one that owes you money to go out, work, come pay back what he owes, and come each day and receive the pledge back and come and give the pledge to you. And by all means, make a way for him to pay back, but don't allow him to become unable to be covered at night. That's really it's about fairness here. Another perspective that the Torah can be seen as our outer garment, and it covers us while we walk in the dark and perilous times, and we should not cause our brother to throw off the keeping of his Torah in order to pay off his debt. We must ensure that justice and right ruling are upheld and maintained on every level. And by that, I mean on a practical level. We cannot turn a blind eye and say to another person, oh, I know you're in debt, and I know the only way you're going to get out that debt is to, take off the covering of set-apart partners, go work on the Sabbath. No, it's not. That's not a way that person is going to be able. Some people think, I have to work on the Sabbath. It's the only way I'm going to get my bills paid. No, you're taking off that covering. You're taking off a pledge of the inheritance, the seal of the set-apart spirit. You're grieving the Spirit when you do that. In verse 28, when it says, do not revile an Elohim or curse the ruler of your people, the Elohim that's being spoken of here is not mighty ones in terms of that which is worshipped. It's referring to judges, the people who were officiating the right ruling in the day. They were seen as those, like Moshe was made by Yahweh as an Elohim to Aharon. It's really the one that he's officiated and appointed to be in the place that makes sure that the right ruling is being administered. And you don't revile an Elohim or a ruler of your people, or curse them. You don't take light what they are showing you to walk the way in. Showing any form of disrespect toward those that our master has appointed to equip the body breaks the body down, and this spreads like yeast. The word is clear on how you are to deal with any accusations against an elder, and you don't receive an accusation against an elder except from 2 or 3 witnesses. There's a process. We are not to revile Elohim nor those he has placed over us. This is very important for us to recognize. As we see here, this is something that Hebrews 13 gives it very clear to listen to those who are appointed over you. Obey them, because it won't go well for you if you don't listen to what they teach you according to the Torah. It must always be in the context of the right rulings of Elohim. Just because somebody says that they're a leader and they're teaching you traditions, you don't have to be listening to them. In fact, you shouldn't be under them in the first place. Then in verse 29, it says, do not delay to give your harvest and your vintage. Give to me the firstborn of your sons. This instruction is very clear. Do not procrastinate what is due to be brought to Yahweh. And this is a simple lesson, and can be also understood as we are to give our lives as a living sacrifice. We shouldn't procrastinate in that. And a practical way to keep our lives effective in giving our all to the Master is to make sure that we are not delaying a proper giving of tithes and first fruits. Because when you do, you might end up neglecting it altogether. Too many people today, in many ways, wait till all their bills are settled and see what's left to give to Yahweh. And Yahweh says, do not delay. The Hebrew word for delay comes from the verb achar, which means to remain behind, to tarry, to hesitate. And this word achar is actually translated as staying at home in Mishle 23, verse 30, when describing those who have contentions, complaints, hurts, woes, and sorrows. And so they are the ones that are staying long at the wine and getting drunk on the mixed wine, so to speak, searching out the mixed wine. And I'll read that passage in context of what I'm saying here in about delaying. Mishle 23 from verse 29 to 30 says, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contentions, who has complaints, who feels hurt without cause, who has redness of eyes, those staying long at the wine, those going in to search out mixed wine. So staying long at something, tarrying at something that's not good for you, is the one who has contentions and woes and sorrows and feels hurt without cause and et cetera, et cetera. And the reason I'm highlighting this passage, expanding on this idea of delaying in terms of delaying obedience, is simply to highlight a clear problem that we see many facing today, is that they're delaying their obedience. And the reason they're delaying their obedience to the Master is that they're staying too long where they shouldn't be. They're staying long at that which confuses and corrupts. The term that's used for mixed wine is highlighting a picture of wine that's mixed with herbs or spices, etc., and it represents a concoction or a cocktail of sorts. And from a figurative point of view, as a parable, it refers to mixed theologies that many are staying long at and becoming drunk in. And they are no longer able to rightly divide the truth and separate the set apart from the profane, as they become continually drunk on lawless wormwood teachings of the whore. And due to corrupted teachings of falsehood that are being taught as teachings of man that are to be followed, many are delaying their obedience. And they're delaying their obedience to give to Yahweh what is due to Yahweh, as they're not putting Yahweh first, but are simply seeking to find out other ways which necessitate a justification and an excuse to not do what's required. Now, I'll just give a simple example. It's very quick, very simple, hopefully. Somebody has, let's use the figure 10,000. Now, it can be whatever denomination, whatever currency you want that in. So they have 10,000. Now, from that 10, they know they should give Yahweh 1,000 because that's a tenth as a base beyond anything else that's done there. And in the process of contemplating their giving, delaying giving, and they listen to corrupted mixed teachings, and they get corrupted and they hesitate and they tarry, they delay to give it for various reasons. They find themselves then quickly paying off the expenses that they need to do to debtors that are looking for their money. And then they end up left with, let's say they're left with 1,500 out of the 10,000. And then they're left with that 1,500. And it gets extremely hard for them to now give the 1,000 out of the 1,000 because it would only leave them with 500. What do I do? And so this is what people do when they hesitate to give, thinking they can't afford. And in effect, they're walking in rebellion and they're robbing Yahweh. Delayed obedience is disobedience. So as we end this chapter, the simple fact of all right rulings is do not delay. Enough said. Chapter 23.
Do not bring a false report. Do not put your hand with the wrong to be a malicious witness. Do not follow a crowd to do evil, nor bear witness in a strife so as to turn aside after many, to turn aside what is right. And do not favor a poor man in his strife. When you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall certainly return it to him. When you see the donkey of him who hates you lying under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. You shall certainly help him. Do not turn aside the right ruling of your poor in his strife. Keep yourself far from a false matter, and do not kill the innocent and the righteous, for I do not declare the wrong right. And do not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the seeing one and twists the words of the righteous. And do not oppress a sojourner, as you yourself know the heart of a sojourner, because you were sojourners in the land of Mitzrayim. And for 6 years you are to sow your land, and shall gather its increase. But the 7th year you are to let it rest, and shall leave it, and the poor of your people shall eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field eat. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive yard. 6 days you are to do your work, and on the 7th day you rest, in order that your ox and your donkey might rest, and the son of your female servant and the sojourner be refreshed. And in all that I have said to you take heed, and make no mention of the name of other mighty ones, let it not be heard from your mouth. 3 times in the year you are to celebrate a festival to me, God, the festival of Matzot. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the new moon of Aviv. For in it you came out of Mitzrayim, and do not appear before me empty-handed. And the festival of the harvest, the first fruits of your labors which you have sown in the field, and the festival of ingathering, at the outgoing of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. 3 times in the year all your males are to appear before the Master Yahweh. Do not slaughter the blood of my slaughtering with leavened bread, and the fat of my festival shall not remain until morning. Bring the first of the first fruits of your land into the house of Yahweh your Elohim. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. See, I am sending a messenger before you to guard you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on guard before him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he is not going to pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you diligently obey his voice and shall do all that I speak, then I shall be an enemy to your enemies and a distresser to those who distress you. For my messengers shall go before you and shall bring you into the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I shall cut them off. Do not bow down to their mighty ones, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but without fail overthrow them, and without fail break down their pillars. And you shall serve Yahweh your Elohim, and he shall bless your bread and your water, and I shall remove sickness from your midst. None shall miscarry or be barren in your land. I shall fill the number of your days. I shall send my fear before you, and cause confusion among all the people to whom you come, and make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I shall send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before you. I shall not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become a waste and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little I shall drive them out from before you, until you have increased and you inherit the land. And I shall set your border from the sea of reeds to the sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the river. For I shall give the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them, nor with their mighty ones. Let them not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me when you serve their mighty ones, when it becomes a snare to you.
Okay, so in verse 1 and verse 7, we're clearly told to not bear false witness. And the Hebrew word that's translated as false is shav. It means falsehood, lies, emptiness, worthlessness, and it's a word that's also translated in Scripture as naught. We take note that the first time that this word is used is in the command to not bring the name of Elohim to naught. And therefore, that's what the false prophets and dreamer of dreams are doing through false teachings, through deceitful traditions that nullify the need to seek Yahweh and guard his commands, walk in his teachings and instructions, and proclaim his name. Zechariah chapter 10 verse 2 says, "For the household idols spoke emptiness. The diviners saw falsehood and relate dreams of deceit. They comfort in vain. Therefore they have wandered about like sheep. They are afflicted. There is no shepherd." As a result of idolatry that had been highly promoted, false prophets and diviners of evil were increasing and had caused many to wander away from the truth and left stranded without a shepherd who is able to keep them from falsehood if they simply followed the good shepherd. Tehillah 26 verse 4, the psalmist says, "I have not sat with men of falsehood, nor do I enter in with pretenders." I mean, that is something that we should take serious today. We should not be sitting with a whole bunch of pretenders. You know, to sit in Hebrew is often a reference or idiom to learning. And it becomes clear here that we are not to learn the worthless ways of the world, but we are to be sitting at our master's feet, learning his ways so that we can walk in complete set apartness before him. So stop learning from false sources that nullify and bring to naught the Torah. The root word shav can also be a reference to idol worship, which is performed in the lifting up and celebrating of pagan-rooted feasts, of sun worship, which is the partaking in the table of demons, which we cannot partake in and then think we can partake in the master's table, and those who are lifting up their lives to falsehood and the tradition of lies, they will not enter the presence of Yahweh. Now, the Hebrew word that's translated here as malicious, so you also do not be a malicious witness. Some translations say ruthless. Now, the Hebrew word for malicious or ruthless is chamas, and it means violence, wrong, or malicious. And what's worth taking note of is the Arabic term Hamas is the term that's used to describe the Islamic militaristic group that uses politics and violence to achieve its goals. When people turn aside from the Torah, their lives inevitably resort to a violent and malicious stand against the need to walking in the Torah. And then they become or bring a malicious witness against others. We also warned against how we represent others within the body before the master. Tehillah 101 verse 5 says, "Him who secretly slanders his neighbor, I cut off. I do not tolerate one who has a haughty look and a proud heart." Mishle 19 verse 9 says, "A false witness does not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies perishes." Mishle 24 verse 8 says, "Do not witness against your neighbor without cause, and do not deceive with your lips." Shaul reminds us in chapter 4 of Ephesians, "Therefore, having put off the false, speak truth, each one with his neighbor, for we are members of one another." And what we read last week in the 10 words, Shemoth 20 verse 16, "You do not bear false witness against your neighbor." So we must be on guard against the kind of witness that we are to be and what we are not to be. I mean, we are to guard that we are to be a true witness, trustworthy witness that is guarding the commands and possessing the witness of Yeshua Messiah as we walk in the truth. And any departure from that renders one false and breathing out lies. This is a huge warning against the lawless who assume to bear the witness of Messiah in their lives while they've cast his commands behind them or changed many of his commands by adding and taking away, and that's what Yahweh hates. We must be on guard against slandering and being blasphemous in our words against Yahweh and against his body. And so it's very clear here at the start of this Torah portion, or this chapter of 23 in this Torah portion, that we must watch what we are witnessing of. We must be on guard against what we're witnessing. And we should be making sure that our speech is seasoned with salt. Because we are told very clearly in Scripture that a trustworthy witness does not lie. And verse 2 continues to expand on how we guard against being a malicious witness, and that is take a stand for the truth. When it says here, in Mishle 1 verse 10 to 16 is a nice parable and warning against following that which is wrong. It says, "My son, if sinners entice you, do not give in. If they say, 'Come with us, lie in wait with us for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like the grave, and entirely like those going down to the pit. Let us find all precious goods. Let us fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path, and for their feet run to evil, and they hurry to shed blood." All too often, you might hear people say, "Oh, they all can't be wrong." And the sad reality is, oh, yes, they can be. And more bluntly, oh, yes, they are. The command given here straight after not being a malicious witness is, do not follow a crowd to do evil. It's as simple and plain as it is. However, the definition of evil seems to be what's clouding so many people's judgment today. The Hebrew word for evil, ra, means wicked, evil, bad, harmful, and it's often expressed in the feminine as ra'ah. And what we see here is we get this idea of the opposite for being good. Now, in the Hebraic mindset, when Yahweh was creating and he said, whenever he saw that it was good, that Hebrew word good, tov, highlights functional, the way it should be, functioning as it was created to function. The opposite of that is evil. So therefore, to be evil means to be not functioning as one should. So when you're not walking in the right rulings, you're evil. We need to be on guard against the broad way that leads to destruction versus the narrow way that we are to be seeking, and few are finding it, because many preferring the broad way of acceptance and tolerance of evil, which means tolerance of corruption and wrong ways. And we must not follow a crowd to be dysfunctional. Verse 3 and 6 highlights again the need to show favor to the poor, or do not show favor to the poor in his strife, or turn aside right ruling. So when a poor man is going through strife, right ruling must still be fair and just. And just because a man is in a poor position and is weak, don't cause him now to get favor that he should have, when he should have done something else. And now you overlook the right ruling because he's just as guilty as if he wasn't poor. If he'd broken right ruling, he's guilty. Don't now favor him. Oh, because he's poor, we can't, he was supposed to do this, but you got to understand, no, proper right ruling must be administered. And here the Hebrew word for poor could also be rendered as weak, lazy, or slack. And often is the case where a lazy one who is weak in the belief tries to get off with what they should be accountable and responsible for. We are to walk in wisdom without partiality. It's the same right ruling for all. Love your enemies. Our master said the following in Matthew 5. You have heard that it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those cursing you, do good to those hating you, pray for those insulting you and persecuting you, so that you become sons of your Father in the heavens. Because he makes the sun rise on the wicked and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those loving you, what reward have you? And we mentioned that earlier. So when we look at these words, and it says, our master said, you heard that it was said. Now, because it was never written that you shall hate your enemy. But what had happened is that man-made oral traditions, oral Torah had come about when he says, you must hate your enemy. Well, the Torah says, love your enemy. So the master was highlighting their corrupted traditions that had started nullifying the right rulings of Elohim by inserting their own right rulings. And who is your enemy here in these verses of Shemoth 23, verse 4 to 5. It may be referring to someone who's within your camp and something or someone who has something against you, not necessarily the Amalekites with whom Yahweh has sworn an eternal enmity against us with, which he will overthrow and overcome. Yahweh will deal with the outsiders and their evil deeds. This is about right ruling within a body. This is referring to enemies within Israel, someone whose personality you just don't mesh well with, or someone with whom you might be competing. All of these right rulings are right rulings of how we are to govern ourselves as a community and adhere to fair and just right rulings and apply these to all. And be careful to not twist the righteous words, not take bribes, not slander another, receive the sojourner, and these are clear right rulings and rules for righteous living. Then we get the clear Sabbath laws and the Sabbath year and the rest that was to be given. This was also going to see and be a test to see if they trust Yahweh. Verse 13 makes it very clear again, make no mention of other mighty ones. And here we see a very clear witness of who is it that you are worshiping. So I'll continue to couple along with what I've said earlier about not having the names of foreign mighty ones on our lips. A good read for anybody that hasn't done it, the book called Come Out of Her, My People, written by C.J. Costa, who passed away late 90s, I think. He was instrumental in beginning the process of getting the ISR scriptures together, in bringing us a translation that can have the Hebrew names of people and places restored. But in his book, Come Out of Her, My People, in Afrikaans, Kom uit van haar, my volk, he presents a well-researched book of many of the words that we often use too loosely today, and how we are to truly come out of the Babylon system of worship and corruption and get our speech seasoned with salt, get our lips cleaned up. Now, this verse makes it clear that we are not to let these things even be heard from our mouths. And we must make sure that, as we come on this walk and we learn to refine our speech, we even prefer to say day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, because even the days of the Gregorian calendar of the week are actually attributed to Greek deities that were worshipped. So let's make sure that our speech is seasoned with salt. And if we can't even get our master's name set apart, how are we going to get other corruption off our lips? Because it starts with love for Elohim first, as a standard by which we love one another. Would you want to share something? Verse 14 to 19 is basic in teaching us to keep Yahweh's feasts his way, and make sure that we are obeying his feast. I'm not going to go in depth into the feast. The 3 times a year is collective of all the feasts that we keep. We learn that when we get round to each cycle of the feast, and we go in depth into that. But Yahweh is making it clear in this right rulings of how we are to live as a people together. No one must neglect their duty of guarding the feasts of Yahweh. And when he gives this picture, I don't know, we're running out of time. I don't want to rush. So I'll carry on in terms of the messenger of Yahweh after lunch. So I encourage you not to miss out. In an hour, we'll be back, and we'll continue looking at the rest of this chapter 23 and then 24, and then go into Yirmiyahu and a bit of Hebrews. So on that note, I don't want to rush myself too much. Just before we go, Muachi has just said, Shemoth 23:13, and make no mention of the name of other mighty ones, let it not be heard from your mouth. Are we not violating this command when we make mention names of other mighty ones, even for teaching purposes, as the verse doesn't give any exceptions? I mentioned just now, we must always understand context. We read scripture and I use the one example of Molech or Malcolm. We are to read the word. We're not giving credence or worship to Malcolm or Molech when we are mentioning those names in reference. So I've always said it's in the reference to a teaching of worship. I certainly don't call on Yahweh by corrupted titles and names. Like I've mentioned, what we came out from, I'm not using that in any way. So making no mention on our lips is in the context of the worship that we are attributing to Yahweh.
No, but we say the days.
Yes.
And we shouldn't say those.
Yeah, so I do believe there is a clear balance of highlighting what we are to be refining our lips by. And by all account, I would love to never say the corrupted titles that are not to be attributed to Yahweh. But in teaching people coming out, we need to make it clear that that is not who he is anymore. So I hope that helps. Ultimately, we should be refining our speech and be striving toward having nothing of the sort on our lips, not even the days of the week or the months of the year. While we're in month 5, whatever. I mean, it is a learning curve. And in a world that we're living in, it's how we will stand out. But we need to be able to teach others how to get it off our lips too. And ultimately, we will see everything being stripped away when we come to the Master in the renewal.
I mean, when you say don't say Lord and Jesus and God,
Yeah.
you're using those as examples of what not to say.
Yes.
But some people use teachings, then they say Lord,
Yes.
and then in brackets.
Okay.
That's what I think he's also saying. Don't do that.
Yes, I think that's a good point. Just gone over 1 minute, but bear with me in closing this thought. I think Caroline's brought up a good point. When I use do not say Lord God and Jesus, because it's not Yahweh, I'm giving that instruction of that's not what I use. But there are teachers out there that use Lord and then in brackets put Yahweh or brackets put Jesus, or they'll say them and they're not distinctly separating. And for me, that is having the names of false mighty ones on your lips and attributing it to Yahweh. So I hope that helps. Let's pray. Master Yahweh, we bless, praise, and exalt your mighty and wondrous name, your set-apart name that is above all. And I pray that our lives will reflect the pure esteem and praise that is to be brought to you, your name, and for your name, and about your name, in proclaiming who you are as we live out your right rulings to the perfection of set-apartness that is a standard by which we are to live. And as we come to partake in a Sabbath meal together across the homes that are gathered together, I pray that you bless each home, each table, as we are learning clear separation and set-apartness and what true right ruling brings before us as a gift of being delivered from slavery to corrupted ways, now being able to have the joy and the privilege to sit at your table and be thankful for your provision. So we thank you for every table being made ready for your provision for our lives, that you are our provider and our sustenance is in you and you alone, and we do not give your praise to idols. And we praise you and you alone. And I thank you, Master Yahweh, for cleaning our lips with praise set apart unto you. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen and amen.